In this part of the video about linear functions, we're going to be looking at the x and y intercept. The x-intercept is where the graph crosses the x-axis, and of course the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. This is the x-axis, this is the y-axis. So let's just take a look graphically. In this first graph, let's talk about the y-intercept. That's where it crosses the y-axis. That looks about to be -2. The x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis. That looks to be about +6. Now, another thing I want to point out is that those are the correct answers. What would be the ordered pair? That ordered pair would be 0, -2, and this ordered pair would be 6, 0. Just you need to think about those as ordered pairs, not just as numbers. Let's look at the second example. Y-intercept, x-intercept. That's at +4, and the x-intercept seems to be 6 again. So the ordered pair for this one would be 0, 4, and the ordered pair here again would be 6, 0. So now we have those special lines of horizontal and vertical. This one, it has a y-intercept, and that seems to be 3, but x-intercept, it never crosses this x-axis. So there is no x-intercept. But again, this ordered pair would be 0, 3. Now let's look at this vertical line. Does it have a y-intercept? Does it cross the y-axis? No, it doesn't. So we would say none. But the x-intercept, it does cross the x-axis, I think at -4. And if I ask you for the ordered pair, that would be -4, 0. Now that is not what your homework is about, but I want you to think about what those are graphically because that's going to become very important in later lessons. Your homework is going to be problems like this. They're going to give you a linear equation and they're going to ask you to find the x and y intercept. Well, if you noticed in those other examples, the y-intercept had an x-coordinate of 0 and the x-intercept had a y-coordinate of 0. Every time that is true. So that is how we're going to find the x and y intercepts. So I'm just going to make a table of values, and I'm going to let x be 0 and solve for y. I'm going to let y equal to 0 and solve for x, and those are going to be my intercepts. All right, so I'm going to have 4 times 0 plus 3y equals 8. That's 0. Then just divide by 3. So I have y equals 8/3. And that's your y-intercept. We're solving for y. Okay, let's start again. Now we're going to let y be 0. And again, that's 0. So we would just divide by 4 and get 2 for x, and that is your x-intercept. But if I ask you for the ordered pairs, there's the y-intercept, there's the x-intercept. So just make a t-chart and put your zeros in. Look at this example. Again, to find the x and y intercepts, you're going to let x equal to 0, but this time let's see what happens. 0 divided by anything is 0. So what's going to happen here? You're going to get the same thing. What does that tell you? That this line crosses through the origin, and so the x and y intercepts are the same. It is the origin. If you want to test it out, you could try it again by plugging in 0 for y, but hopefully you will see that you're going to get exactly the same thing. So here we have a line that's solved for y. It's y equals mx plus b, so you should already know what the y-intercept is, right? You should know that it's -1. But if you want to test it my way, let's just see what happens. Okay, if we let x be 0, 7 times 0 minus 1, you can see that y equals to -1, and that certainly is b. And that's the easy one. But what about the x-intercept? So we have let y equal to 0 and solve for x. So I'm going to add 1 and I'm going to divide by 7. So that's 1/7. So again, this is the y-intercept. We call that b. This is the x-intercept. Right, so here again we have those fractions. And since I'm going to put 0 in, I could get rid of those fractions like we talked about in the other video. But let's just see if we can do this. If I put in 0 for x, that goes away. So I have negative 2/5 y equals 1. Do you remember how to get rid of something like negative 2/5? Well, you just multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, remember all of that's going to multiply and you're going to get 1y, and then 1 times negative 5/2 is negative 5/2. I challenge you to go back and get rid of the fractions and then plug in your zeros, but you should still get the same answer. Let's go ahead and finish this up. I'm going to put in 0 for y this time. So that's 0. So I have 3/4 x equals negative 1. And again, I'm going to multiply both sides by that reciprocal of 4/3. So I have x equals negative 4/3. And that is my x-intercept. Now, the great thing about the x and y intercepts is that you could now plot those 2 points on a graph, connect them, and that's a different way to graph a line.